Hello and welcome to episode 258 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, a UN agency which regulates maritime transport has voted to implement a global cap on carbon emissions from ocean shipping and a penalty on entities that exceed that limit. We assume that penalty involves some sort of walking of the plank.
A new study suggests that less pollution in the air means more solar power production. That headline once again, clean air is a good thing.
We have another amazing story of how solar and batteries are changing lives in Africa. Stay tuned for this one. It's a good one. Actually, they're not changing lives, Brian. Come to think of it, they're actually saving them.
Wow.
Which is a form of changing lives when you think about it.
Yes. Greenpeace has been ordered to pay $660 million in damages after they protested the Dakota Access Pipeline. When we said the Clean Energy Show liked climate-focused lawsuits, that's not what we were talking about.
All that and more on this here edition of the Clean Energy Show.
So, James, I know you're a man who likes a tasty treat.
Oh, sure.
Are you aware of the cherry blossom candy?
Yes, I am.
Are you aware that it has been discontinued?
Yes, I am.
Oh, you were aware?
Yes. I follow these things, Brian. You're holding it up on the video. If you're watching or listening, you can maybe, you know what it is. It's a chunk of chocolate with a cherry inside.
Well, yes,
it's some cherry goo.
Most people don't know what it is because this is actually a Canadian-specific candy.
Uh-huh.
And it's been in production since the 1890s.
Well, that sounds like it makes sense to me because it's an odd candy.
And I tasted one, and it kind of tasted like it was from the 1890s. But yeah, I had actually never had one before. Had you had one before?
No, because it has cherries in it, Brian. It has a fruit in it. I don't mix fruit with chocolate.
I had never had one either because they seemed always like your grandparents' candy or something when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems weird as a kid to refuse candy, but this is one of the candies I refused as a kid.
Yeah.
And but once I heard they were being discontinued and they've been around since the 1890s, I thought to myself, okay, I've got to try a cherry blossom.
Where did you find one?
They had some still at the Co-op store, the Co-op grocery store. They probably still have one if you want to pick one up. But I don't know if you've seen one lately, and I don't know if anyone can read the fine print on the box here on the video, but there's actually a Health Canada warning on the front of it.
Okay.
As far as I can remember, I don't think I've seen that on a candy before, but there's a warning here from Health Canada that says high in saturated fat and sugars. And I assume that's probably because it's only 45 grams. Like, this is a smaller chocolate, but it probably has
So
all
the
of
one candy bar that has a fruit in it, an entire chunk of fruit, has the warning on it. The other ones don't?
Yeah. I've never seen the warning before. And yeah, it's like, I guess you'd call that a maraschino cherry in the middle and a little bit of maraschino cherry goo.
Yeah.
Surrounded by chocolate, but they don't actually call it chocolate. So I think it's one of those cases where there's not enough chocolate content in it to actually call it chocolate.
Can you call it a cherry?
Yeah, maybe not. But, I really thought, especially with that warning on the front, I thought, okay, well, this is going to be tasty. I mean, if something has a warning,
it has to be good, right?
Like high sugar, high fat, and it's really not that good. It's cheap chocolate that doesn't really taste like chocolate, which probably isn't chocolate.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was an experience. We bought 4 of them, and I had one, my partner had one, and then my kids refused to eat them.
That would be me. That was you too when you were younger, but you decided to go for it.
Yeah.
Was the cherry fresh? I mean, how does a cherry survive in a chocolate bar?
Well, maraschino cherry is never fresh. It's like a preserved cherry. So it tasted normal, like a cherry you would get on a sundae at Dairy Queen or something. But
yeah, I remember staring at them as I worked the night shift at a gas station car wash and thinking I could just go eat that if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. Like, I'd rather have a Cuban lunch. Do those still exist?
They were brought back
temporarily,
and I think they've been discontinued again. But yeah, Cuban lunch was another chocolate bar from our youth that you couldn't get for a long time, and then somebody bought the rights and brought it back.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a few, and they were okay. They were also seemed very, very high in bad things.
Sure.
So they were.
That's chocolate and peanuts. Milk chocolate in a little cup or something with peanuts in it. It's not that different than anything else.
But I had a friend who used to work the night shift at a convenience store, and he would, it was the midnight shift, and, so he would invite me around, and it was basically like free snacks because it was good to have like a second person there in case the store got robbed or something.
Well, I think I've told this story on the show before, but once I was talking to my current partner for life on the phone as a girlfriend at the time, and the power went out, and the phone went out. Just the phone went out.
Oh, just the phone.
Somehow the phone line went dead, and there was no cell phones. So I actually left the store. I didn't have the capability of locking it. And I ran down the street, or I might have taken my bike to the nearest payphone to assure her that I was not robbed so she wouldn't call the police, because this was an issue, a possibility, right? So it was in a sort of obscure part of town, the industrial area. But there was a Buddy's Steak Ranch across the street. We've mentioned that before.
Well, I guess if I was going to rob that store, the first thing I would do is cut the phone line.
Yeah, cut the phone line so the guy can't, and he can steal the maraschino cherries from the chocolate aisle. What's it called again?
The cherry blossom.
Cherry blossom. Yeah, I never understood them, Brian. I never understood fruit nut bars or anything at the, I just didn't understand them. I didn't want them.
And they probably were better in 1890 because, they've got all these weird chemical preservatives and stuff in it, where I assume in the 1890s it was probably actual chocolate and an actual cherry.
Okay. Well, speaking of bad food, I just got back from my doctor's appointment a couple of days ago, and I have a new doctor because mine retired.
Oh, yeah.
The end of the year. She sort of stuck around and was transitioning for like 6 months or so. But then I never did see any interns or any replacement. I just saw my actual doctor, and she kept being around. She said, my license expires at the end of the year, so I'm not going to go on any further. There's a hard limit to this. And yeah, so I had this eye problem, and I went to an eye specialist, and he ordered an MRI on my noggin. And that was scary because I thought he mentioned a brain tumor at one point as a possibility. So, of course, I'm freaking out because I'm James, and why shouldn't you? I mean, even a reasonable person would freak out.
Sure.
Yeah, so I went for an MRI about a month ago in Moose Jaw. I had to go to a different city. It was almost an hour away, but we had an okay time doing that. The hospital was very weird because it's brand new and small. It's unlike the big city hospitals, and it's quiet. So the emergency there had like 3 people in it, instead of 1,000 people who are going to be there for 15 hours. Because more, bad cases. I asked if people go to this emergency, because, if a 45-minute drive or a 50-minute drive from our city would save you time ultimately in your emergency room visit, unless you're having a heart attack. Yeah. She said, yeah, they do.
Wow.
But a lot of people, there's bad weather. That highway gets closed in the wintertime from any sort of bad weather, even though it's a cross-Canada, Trans-Canada highway. Anyway, I didn't get the MRI technologist. By the way, it was like being in the middle of a washing machine for an hour. It was really weird. They put headphones on, and they asked you, what kind of music do you want? And I panicked, and I said, I didn't want to, I don't have a lot of music that I'm, what does that mean? A genre? Or do you want me to put on Taylor Swift for an hour?
Yeah.
So I just said classical, which I don't listen to classical music. I don't hate classical music, but I thought,
sure,
well, maybe it would be relaxing because you have to hold your head still. And they tried to put this cage around my head to hold it down, and it wasn't working. It was like, I've got a big head.
Yeah.
You could tell that my hat, if you're watching the video, is small in my head. I cannot get the proper size hat or headwear. So they had to jam it in there. And then I sat there for an hour as it spun around, and they could talk to me in my headset, listening to not good quality classical music. And I forgot, Brian, that classical music gets very dramatic. Dun, 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 it's like, oh no, this isn't relaxing at all. I should have just asked for spa music or something. They said, well, go look at the Sask Health website, the website that will have your test results. I said, I'm not going to look on there to see if I have a brain tumor and then wonder all weekend, what does it mean or something like that? Or I don't even want to look at my brain. But yeah, I got back to the doctor. She says, I told her this whole story. It's a brand new doctor, so I had to feel her out. She said, I recognize you from somewhere. Have we had you a patient before? And of course, I used to have a TV show. So great. There's another person who can't quite place me in the medical community. And she said, oh, you don't have a brain tumor. Are you happy? And I said, yes. But she's not young, but she turned out to be a great doctor. And pretty much cut from the same cloth as my last doctors. And I'm happy with her. And Yeah, so it's going to be a good time. So my eye, they don't know what's wrong with my eye, but I'm supposed to lose weight. So working on that. And my expensive water bottle is helping me fill my cavernous belly with the fluids instead of calories from maraschino infused chocolate.
Yeah.
And other things like that. I did have a couple problems with the Chevrolet Bolt that my wife drives this week. The first was a bulging tire.
Oh,
So yeah, it's the car's only 2 years old and it's got a bulging tire. And it could happen if you hit a curb, because it was curbside.
I guess.
But it looked like it could pop at any second. So this was a crisis, having just had a flat tire on the way to another city in November. Finding tires for an EV, the ones I wanted, because I had an emergency tire down in Saskatoon.
Yeah.
And I wanted to match that tire because it's brand new, pretty much a couple months old, not too much kilometers on it. And so I had to match that. And to do that, there was only like 3 in Western Canada, and they happened to be in the city north of us, 2 hours. So they had that shipped in the next day, and I got it on at my tire place north of the city here.
So just to get the same brand and the same model of tire.
Same brand, same model for an EV. And the EV tires are not great. I'm thinking Costco's actually looking pretty good because you get a lot with that. You get, rotations and free repairs and things that other tire places don't give you. I don't know if you need 4 tires to do it or not. I have to ask them the next time I'm there, but I was looking into that, and usually I buy cheaper tires than what Costco sells, but for an EV, you need, if you don't want to lose your range and you don't want noisy tires, these are issues. The problem with stock tires on a lot of EVs is that they do one thing well, and that is range. They have low rolling resistance, but they're sometimes not, they don't last long. They're not good for puncture resistance, as I found out. Yep. And they don't last long. They're not good for puncture resistance, and sometimes they're not good for traction. Like these are not great tires. They're terrible, actually. We should have had winter tires. My son got winter tires, the cheapest ass winter tires he could find for his, 25-year-old car. He swears by them now. He said, "You're never going to not drive with winter tires." And I know you do too.
Yep.
I had winter tires for a month once when my Leaf came with them on it, but they were so noisy that I hated them. And I got the original tires back on. They were a lot quieter and a lot more energy efficient, which is important in EV because you'll see the hit of 10% if you put on a winter tire or other kinds of non-EV tires. So that was a bit tricky. And also something broke on the car, on the Bolt. The rear hatch won't open. And I tried to find information on the internet. Usually you can just go and find it for your specific car. I found very little for any car. I found a video on how to replace the latch on my car. And for some reason, I thought it was 3 years old, just beyond 3 years old now. So I wouldn't have had the bumper-to-bumper warranty. But there was my brain, which is apparently in good condition because I have the MRI, Brian. It's only 2 years old, so we have warranty. And I was stressing about this for days, trying to figure out how I'm going to fix it, how much the part costs. Because, if you got the dealership to do this, it could be anything. It could be wiring. It could be bad wiring. It could be a bad signal from your fob. It could be something that they spend hours trying to track down.
Yeah.
And then they have to rip apart, So I'm very pleased that it's still under warranty. But I'm pissed off at Chevrolet for making a car that somehow the lash doesn't last. Like my Nissan, everything works on it, pretty much everything. I don't know, like it's got wear and tear on the suspension, but everything works on it. I'm used to Toyotas, and I'm also pissed off at Toyota because they should have been making cars just the same time as everyone else, and I'd probably have an affordable version of that, and I would have bought a Toyota. I would have been happy to buy a Toyota. And I know they're making some more cars, but we're very doubtful as to when they'll arrive. And of course, you don't really want to buy the first year if you can help it. You want it to be around for a couple of years if possible. But having said all that, battery electric cars only require 40% of the repairs as internal combustion cars. This is from carscoops.com. Battery electric vehicles have 4.2 breakdowns per year per 1,000 vehicles. ICE vehicles, 10.4 breakdowns per year per 1,000 vehicles. So, yeah, I think, some of these things that are happening with Hyundai and that, they're going to work them out. They've made some mistakes, but once they figure out that they're new technology in a way, and they're trying out new things, and they've only been around for a couple of years in some cases. Hopefully that gets worked out, and before we know it, they're going to be even more reliable than they are now.
Yeah, well, car ownership is always a hassle in that way, so an EV should be less hassle, less repairs. But, it's always a hassle, and it's easy to see how a robotaxi future could replace all of that. I mean, if you were just taking robotaxis around, it would be cheaper, and you wouldn't have to worry about stuff like that.
Yeah, and I kind of wish robotaxis were here now. At least in our city, I don't think it would make a huge difference. But I would rather not have to worry about breakdowns anymore in my life.
For sure. Okay, from Bloomberg, clean air leads to increased solar power production. So this is a bit of a no-brainer. I mean, this is kind of an obvious thing, but not something I had thought about. But we have certain cities we know. We've been talking about New York and London with different congestion rules for cars. And, we know that the air is getting cleaner in some places, and that actually leads to more sunshine, which leads to then more solar power production. So this is a reversal in air pollution trends. It's been recorded in the US, Europe, and Japan, says Martin Wild, a climate scientist and professor at ETH Zurich. And this has implications for solar power generation, but also potentially for global warming. And the downside is, I think we talked about this before, is that more sunshine could potentially lead to hotter temperatures. So that's the flip side of that. But this is a real, genuine increase in solar power production because the planet has basically been getting dimmer for decades now because of all the particulates and pollution in the air. And all of this blocks the sun from getting to the earth and getting to the solar panels. But since the 1980s, this has started to reverse in many, many places as we've started to wise up to air pollution. Places like California starting to put stricter emission rules. So an illustration of the brightening is in Potsdam, Germany, which Wild says has one of the longest and best maintained solar radiation monitoring stations in the world. Data from the city on the outskirts of Berlin showed solar radiation declined by 10% from 1947 to the 80s before rebounding by a similar amount through 2017, according to Wild.
Really?
His team ruled out cloud cover and changes in the sun itself as determining factors, suggesting that air pollution was the driving change. So down 10% and then back up 10% when pollution started to decline in that area.
I have noticed this, and I think I reported about it on the show when we had days and days and even weeks of smoke.
Yeah.
And sometimes the smoke is in the upper atmosphere. It's just kind of like a gray cloud.
Yeah.
And I was comparing my solar on my own roof on a completely sunny day compared to other years on that same day. And it was like 25%, 15%, and that sucks. And we're not getting away from that here because we can stop polluting all we want, but the global warming is happening and we're going to have those fires a lot more frequently. Forest fires.
Yeah. There's no statistics mentioned for Canada, but as like London and New York get clearer skies, I would say we're definitely getting less clear skies where we live, and it's all because of the forest fires that are now common throughout the whole summer.
Now, wouldn't you say that if you had solar in Toronto 20 years ago, that it was very smoggy back then, and now it's not so much because industry has moved away and they've cleaned up a few things?
Yeah, they've closed down some coal plants. So the air in Toronto is a lot cleaner than it used to be. So I would assume they're seeing those similar kind of gains to London and New York. Now, it goes on to say that some countries such as India are still dealing with worsening air pollution. We still see that sunlight is reducing, and there's not yet a sign of any recovery in places like India. China, great stats here about China. They've done a lot to clean up air pollution since the 2008 Olympics. Data suggests the country's at a turning point and starting to brighten after decades of dimming. That's what the trend is suggesting. And the quote is, if China could clean up the air such that they would go back to the 1960s in terms of air quality, that's before the industrialization started in China, that also gives a 15% increase in solar radiation. And we know that China has a lot of solar power, solar panels. A 15% increase, that's nothing to sneeze at.
Brian, 1% would be significant in something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Because we looked at the efficiency of my solar inverter on my solar panels in my house, comparing it to one of our friends who had it done earlier, and then they improved it a couple of years later and there was 2 or 3%. Well, the same system outputs a whole lot more energy with even 1% more efficiency or 1% more energy over the 30 years. Like, it's really significant. It's not just a little bit. It's gobs and gobs of energy. And if you're looking at China, which has many nuclear power plants worth of solar, and you're bumping that up, it's ever going to increase through time because you have a feedback loop of cleaning as opposed to the feedback loop of global warming. That's an encouraging cycle.
Yeah. It's a good news story.
All right. Well, that's good to see. And we've talked before about, ships have changed the way they pollute, and there's less white trails from the ships that used to reflect the sun. And I guess the pollution has to be white or at least not black in order to reflect the sun. And reflecting is probably good. All right. Now I want to talk to you about a story that happened on another podcast, which is actually a video documentary, Brian. I was so moved by this. I don't want to steal from them, but I do want to highlight some things, and then you can go watch it yourself. So I'm going to play some clips and talk about this story because it's something that we've been talking about on the show a lot lately, and that is how a little bit of solar does big things in Africa. If you are poor and have no electricity or unreliable electricity, as many parts of the world do, we talk about Pakistan and many countries in Africa. Even the best example is South Africa. And they have intermittent blackouts. Until recently, they've improved a lot. But, I mean, you can't rely on electricity. So what does that mean for a hospital? You can only imagine. So Barber, was one example that, had a little solar panel the size of a couple of phone books, and they could suddenly have a thriving business cutting the village's hair with electric clippers. And throughout Africa, the grid is often terrible and unreliable and can really negatively affect healthcare. Even though the grids actually do try to prioritize the hospitals, it's not good enough. So back in 2013, an Irish doctor named Niall Conroy made a huge impact in Sierra Leone's second largest city when he established a neonatal intensive care unit at Bow Government Hospital. This is a guy who he was a doctor, but he worked in healthcare policy. So he was going there after the turmoil there in Sierra Leone to try and reestablish hospitals. And he began training the local staff to provide the best possible care for the vulnerable newborns who came through their doors. These at-risk babies need warmth from electrically powered incubators, and they need oxygen from oxygen separators, which require electricity, of course. And the nurses, this is surprising, they need light. They need light to see. If you can't see the state of a baby at 3 a.m., you don't know how that baby's doing. And they don't have any light if the power is out. They don't even have phones because they don't have no electricity at home to charge their phones. So, however, in Sierra Leone, there are power cuts almost daily. And they can be a few minutes, and they can be hours, and they can be days. So this is a terrible situation for a neonatal unit.
It's sometimes, I think, probably outside of the context of West Africa, it's difficult to describe how poor the electricity system is. The grid will prioritise the hospital, but pretty much every day you will have several prolonged power cuts. And when you're looking at these kids, neonates aren't all that complex in terms of what they die from. And they die because they're cold and they need oxygen and they deteriorate quickly and nobody sees them. Even in these 30-degree conditions, a small baby will get cold and die of the cold very quickly. So we needed overhead heaters. We would do that, get the baby warm, it would turn off for hours. You need oxygen. And I mean, no one needs me to tell them that if a tiny baby needs oxygen and they're struggling to breathe and that gets turned off for a few hours. And then there's simple things like light. If it's 3 o'clock in the morning and it's pitch black and the baby starts to look a bit blue or pale, you need the nurse to be able to respond quickly. They've no electricity at home, so their phone is dead. They can't even use the phone light. I mean, you'd be talking pitch black.
So this is the Cleaning Up podcast with Michael Liebrecht. He was the person who founded Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Well, it was just New Energy Finance. So he was driving and read a tweet. This is the tweet that changed everything. As a doctor, it had enough.
What was very stressful was I would constantly have babies who we would look after, and you'd get them stabilized and then the power would turn off. And I mean, it's no exaggeration to say you would just look around the ward and see the baby's eyes closing and they would just die. And I remember one day going back to the guest house that I was staying in, and I had spent the entire day looking after these 3 pretty sick babies, and we'd got them stabilized to the extent that the way they were now, with their antibiotics, their fluids, their oxygen, the heat, with all that going, there would be no good reason for them to die. And so I remember getting home late that night, just thinking, I'll get a few hours sleep and then go back in the morning and just, see how they're getting on. So got 4 or 5 hours sleep, got up early the next morning and went in. And I always remember walking into that ward and just seeing this empty couch and life sort of going on as normal, and saying to nurses, what happened? They said, the power turned off overnight, so the babies all died. And this had happened a lot, but I remember on this occasion, it just, I think the cumulative effect, and, I was out here on my own, family are all back in Ireland. I remember just going back to the guest house and rage tweeting, I think, kind of putting a photograph of, of this sort of empty couch up and saying, look, this just has to change.
So that tweet was read by Michael Liebrecht. He was in a taxi on his way to a climate dinner when he read that tweet, and he said it struck him like a gut punch, and he became determined to do something. And he did. He got, he's a wealthy person, and he has wealthy friends, as many wealthy people do. And we're not talking about a huge investment here, Brian.
No, that seems like that's a fairly solvable problem.
Yes, and that's what he thought immediately, is, this should not be happening. It's a solvable problem. So he got together a few of his rich friends and worked it out, and they got some solar panels together and lead gel batteries. And basically the lead gel batteries were charged by the grid as well as the solar, because they do have a rainy season there. And yeah, but apparently they ran into some problems because the lead gel batteries deteriorated quickly, and they're not lithium ion like we normally talk about energy storage in houses and grids and so forth, or cars. And some of the theft of the components also happened due to sort of opportunistic thieves. But he redid it with BYD, Chinese lithium-ion storage batteries that are made for building storage. And there's a few of these. They fit into a shed, and there's an inverter in there and the charging equipment to charge the batteries from the grid or from the solar. And I looked at, if you look at the video, maybe you would have a different opinion, but it looked to me like it was about 3 to 4 times the size of your solar system that you have in your house. You've got quite a bit of solar in your house.
Yeah, 31 panels, about 8 kilowatts.
Yeah, it didn't look, you did it for fun, basically. But this is to save not only one life, but countless lives. So, yeah, it was a 75 kilowatt hour battery right now, which is about the size you probably have in one of your cars, right? I mean, it's something you, Brian, as a mortal human being, not an entity in any sort, did. And yet doing the same thing a little bit more has that much of an effect, because, you personally could go and do this, but you couldn't change the power grid. You can't make a country's power grid better. Michael Liebrecht had no way of doing that, but he knew that solar and batteries existed, and they were affordable and doable. And there's a lot of solar, companies in Africa, and a lot of them are doing work from, charity, from worldwide charities. So that was pretty significant, and dozens and dozens of lives are now saved. You might ask, why don't they use a generator? Because, that's a good question.
Yeah.
But head nurse Juliana describes what it is like not to have fuel for that generator.
Even if we have generator, to fuel the generator is a big challenge, because the hospital will not have that amount of money to fuel it 24 hours around the clock. There was this time that there was no fuel for the generator, and there were a lot of babies in the units. And then all the nurses were just bagging the babies to survive, to breathe. Bagging. Helping them to breathe. Yeah. And so the families that were outside were asking, what can we do? Oh, our babies are dying. What can we do? So the nurses have to say, we need to put on the generator, and there is no fuel in the generator to give power. Because when we have power, then we can light on the oxygen to help the babies to breathe. So the families themselves put monies together. They ran to town. They bought the fuel. They put it in the generator and they light up the unit. And then they gave. But at that same time, we lost 2 babies that very night. That was so terrible for us.
Can you imagine running to town trying to find fuel with what money you can scrape together to save your child's life? That was not a situation to begin. She goes on to talk about how the sun is free. You don't have to buy fuel for it. Oh, we know that. Fuel is expensive and fuel is not always available, even if you can afford it.
Yeah, and these rich people, they could have bought a generator, but then you'd have to worry about fueling it all the time, and they could offer continuing funding to buy fuel for it, but clearly that's the better solution when the fuel from the sun is free.
Obviously, it's a life and death situation, and not something we usually talk about on the show, but 2% of the time they still don't have power, so they're going to expand the solar, I think, a little bit. Not the batteries, but the solar is the weak spot, so they have maybe a little bit more panels. But word has gotten around that this is the unit to come to, so they're serving a lot more patients now, Brian. In 2013, they were seeing 10 babies per month. Now they're 140 because they have this system and because they know if you want your baby to live, this is the place to go. So hundreds of babies per year are being saved by this solar mini grid.
As we speak now, that unit is, 20 feet away from us. There are babies in there who I can absolutely guarantee you are alive this second because of that solar power system. And I can say that without any hesitation. You know, that is the case.
So when we talk about solar changing lives, well, there's many people in the world that wouldn't have been there because of solar. And because it is so easy and you know, the ability to put it anywhere in the world, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough up north without, winter generators, but there's many places in the world, the poorest places in the world often have really good sun, and there's no reason not to do it. Yeah, and we talk about Pakistan just having an unreliable and increasingly expensive electricity grid. Well, they took matters into their own hands. And sometimes they use generators in addition to the solar, but the generators don't have to work as often, and they cost money to fuel and maintain. You can watch the full documentary. It's going to be embedded on our Patreon page publicly for everyone to see. Just go there. It'll be there for you. I thought that would be the easiest place to find it. Patreon.com/cleanenergypod. Or the link is there for the YouTube video, which you can click on right from our Patreon page as well. So I thought that was an inspiring solar story, Brian, and one that I'm sure we're going to see more and more of.
All right. Well, let's follow up that with a disheartening story, shall we?
Okay.
This is from Bloomberg. This was about a month ago. I didn't catch it at the time, but Greenpeace has been ordered to pay $660 million in damages. And this is due to the Dakota Access Pipeline protests that were in 2016 and 2017 before we started the show. But that was definitely a big climate protest story at the time. I think everybody was aware of that happening. And we'd love to talk about, climate-focused lawsuits on the show because, the citizens can often rise up and sue local governments, state governments, national governments. They can sue oil companies. And this has been one way of getting some kind of progress. But of course, the oil companies could also sue people. And so that's what happened in this case. $660 million in damages. Greenpeace, of course, is going to appeal the verdict. So this is not yet final. So hopefully there's a better ending ahead. And Greenpeace has also filed a countersuit against Energy Transfer, that's the company, in the Netherlands. So this all took place in North Dakota, not too far from where we are. I was in North Dakota not too long ago. Wonderful place with lovely film festivals, but the government's maybe not so good. And of course, we have covered this before on the podcast, but, laws can be passed to prevent protests. And particularly in the last few years, certain oil-friendly states have been passing laws to make it more difficult to protest and make it easier to arrest protesters and stop these kinds of protests. Since 2019, 18 other states, including North Dakota, have passed similar laws that create steep penalties for energy protesters. So it's known as a SLAPP lawsuit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. And so these are anti-SLAPP laws that can punish protesters for protesting and standing up for the planet. So, since we covered the, other climate lawsuits, I thought we should mention this one as the flip side of all of this. But, we'll see how it goes. Like I said, a countersuit in the Netherlands. Presumably the Netherlands is maybe a more friendly place to file a countersuit.
You think than oil country in North Dakota? Because this happened in a part of North Dakota that everyone was involved in the oil industry. There was no pure jury to choose from, and they all went against it. And this is threatening to bankrupt Greenpeace North America, just their whole Greenpeace. This could wipe them off. And of course, the oil people are smoking their cigars and laughing their asses off at this, because Greenpeace asked to move it to somewhere else where they get a fair trial. But, the judges are corrupt too, right? I mean, the judges have influence of oil, and we see that around where we live because it's just an extension of what we have here. We're in Saskatchewan, Canada, goes right down into North Dakota too, where they have all these people making lots of money off of gas and supporting the communities.
Yeah, and it depends on what laws are actually on the books. So in other places, this wouldn't happen, but you have to be aware of what the specific laws are in each specific place. And they could have maybe done the protesting in a different way that didn't leave them vulnerable. I'm not really sure. Maybe it was never going to work to begin with, but it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think that one of these days, maybe the protesters will be sent to El Salvador and tortured in prison, because that's the way the things are going these days. And hopefully this works out better. I'll be looking forward. Lightning Round is next.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
The Detroit 3 share of global car sales, Brian, historically 2000, the three big automakers in Detroit, America, was almost 30%, 29%. Now it's only 13%. And guess who's screwing that up even worse? Well, the President of the United States is making it tough for those three, and it's going to get worse, especially with the onset of China. That number is going to go down. They used to sell cars in China. Now they hardly sell any.
Yeah.
And even Tesla has stopped the S and X from sales in China. The next one here is from The Guardian. Almost 200 pesticides have been found in European homes. In a new study, more than 40% of pesticides discovered in dust were linked to serious illnesses, including cancer. Texas is set to double its grid battery storage this year. This is in spite of recent legislation they are invoking down there to increase gas production because renewables are so darn cheap. We don't like free markets. Not us. No, not really. Not when it comes down to evil. From The Independent, in the UK, Pakistan has quietly become the world's biggest solar importer. The solar surge shows how clean energy is no longer just an environmental choice, but a powerful economic solution. I mean, if you listen to our show, you'd know that. Clean energy show fast fact for you. In 2024, the Florida, that's a state in the United States, Brian, one of the great states of the United States, Florida.
Yeah.
Not really. Surpassed California in utility-scale solar and remains number 2 in residential solar. So that's kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Because we hardly ever hear. We rarely come across solar in Florida, even though it makes perfect sense for all the power outages you have due to hurricanes.
Yeah, we tend to get the anti-climate news that comes out of Florida, but who knew that there was all this positive stuff going on as well.
Yeah, and it's economics. It's unstoppable even in a red state like Florida. Oh, it's another CES fast fact. It is illegal to take your kids to school on an e-bike in the province of Ontario, Canada. I'm looking at your face for shock. Did you know this?
I'm absolutely shocked. I did not know this.
The story is in a Toronto Star newspaper. If you don't believe me, the link is there. The UK unveils largest curbside EV charger installations of 6,000 ports on curbsides. UK, big place.
Yeah.
A lot of people. But that's going to make a difference. That's from Electric. 37.5% of new vehicles sold in Germany have a plug. That is really high. That's getting to unstoppable S-curve vertical
That's great.
takeoff. California power utility Edison will bury more than 150 miles of power lines in wake of the devastating LA County firestorms. Not cheap to do this, but it certainly makes a lot of sense for California.
Yeah, we talked about this before because there is often overhead power lines going through very dry places, and that's a bad idea.
You know, if you think about how their liability is for these things, maybe it makes good economic sense, but it also makes your power rates go up. Battery costs are falling and battery storage capacity is skyrocketing. 69 gigawatts of capacity was installed in 2024. That's the power output capacity, not the storage capacity. Almost enough to double total battery storage worldwide last year. So we knew this was coming, and we didn't always have evidence of it. So this is actually is about as big a story as we can talk about on this show, because storage taking off lets other renewables take off, and then that kills other things. It kills the bad things that are wrecking the planet. Another CES Fast Fact for you this week. The United States, these are the United States, Brian, that have used cloud seeding to deal with drought. They are Idaho, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and California. And we use cloud seeding to stop hail in some cases in Canada.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how effective the cloud seeding is for them, but
I think it's working for the hail. I don't know if it's working for the drought, but a number of states are doing it, so maybe. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance called the people of China peasants.
We borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture.
So he doesn't listen to the show, Brian. He probably has no idea what's going on in China.
That's unfortunate. Well, we'll send him a letter and make sure he listens.
JD, those peasants, those so-called peasants are coming to eat your lunch, even though I assume your lunch is possum or possibly roadkill. And finally this week, at the 83rd meeting of the Maritime Environment Protection Committee, that's a UN outfit, the delegates agreed to binding targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from ocean shipping. They've been working on this for 10 years. That industry is responsible for 3% of all emissions globally, the global shipping on oceans. Countries have agreed to a global deal to tackle shipping emissions. After nearly 10 years of negotiations, the agreement covers the vast majority of the world's commercial shipping and means that starting in 2028, ship owners will have to use increasingly cleaner fuels or face fines. And hilariously, the deal was nearly derailed by Saudi Arabia, who forced a last-minute vote, and the U.S., of course, pulled out of talks in London. But the thing eventually passed on Friday, and it doesn't matter that these guys don't agree. It's not like they have veto power like the UN. It means they still have to comply. So regardless if you're a fossil fuel terrorist like the United States and Saudi Arabia and Russia, then you still have to go along with this, even though it makes you feel uncomfortable at the moment with the current administration in the United States, anyway. Small island states and environmental groups were angry that a blanket tax was not agreed to, and the use of palm oil in meeting targets was also a major concern. I guess that's not been eliminated, but there is hope because technology is improving. We talked last week about a hydrogen-powered cruise ship, a mid-sized cruise ship you had on the show. The agreement means it is now the first industry in the world with internationally mandated targets to reduce emissions. This is the first industry to actually do this worldwide. The agreement was passed at the UN's International Maritime Organization, IMO, meeting. It will require owners of large international vessels to increase their use of less carbon-intensive fuels, or up to a fine of $380 per ton of carbon dioxide emissions while they burn the fuel. And although the final agreement was passed, it had to be put to a vote, an unusual move for UN bodies that usually agree measures by consensus, but the vote was requested by Saudi Arabia, who did not support the agreement, and this position was shared by a dozen other oil-producing nations. Coinkydink, they just happen to be oil-producing nations. Although they oppose the proposal, they will be bound to implement it because they are members of the IMO. That story on BBC News and other places.
And that is our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. On social media, we're Clean Energy Pod, and please give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And remember to hit that follow or subscribe button to get new shows every week.
As always, thank you to our Patreon members, Clean Club executives Green Bastard and Brent Routley. Thanks to all of our Patreon supporters and members who help make this podcast possible. And remember, you can see that documentary for free on our Patreon page. You don't even have to sign up. And you'll also get free episodes if you do sign up, exclusive access to our Discord server, discounts at our merch store, all kinds of stuff, including our bonus episodes that we do just for our Patreon members. And thanks a lot for joining us. We'll see you again in 7 days. I'm going to leave you this week with a clip from my favorite performer at Coachella. You know who that was?
No, who's that?
Bernie Sanders.
Oh.
He thinks that climate change is a hoax. He is dangerously wrong. And you and I are going to have to stand up to the fossil fuel industry and tell them to stop destroying this planet.
Then he went on to do 2 hours of heavy metal music.
Sort of like the Pat Boone when he did heavy metal.
Sure. Pat Boone. Yeah, that's
remember he had a heavy metal album?
Yeah. I was allowed to forget that until you brought it back, but no. See you next week.
See you next week.